My neighbor destroyed my garden, so I got his house condemned. The smell hit me first, that acrid, chemical stench that makes your eyes water and your throat burn. I dropped my morning coffee mug right there on the back steps, ceramic shattering against concrete as I stared at what used to be my garden. 2 years. 2 fucking years I'd spent nursing every single plant from seed to full bloom. My prize-winning Cherokee purple tomatoes, the ones that had taken first place at the county fair just 3 months ago, were now twisted black skeletons. The heirloom roses I'd babbied through 2 brutal winters looked like they'd been torched. Even my mint that could grow through concrete, was nothing but withered brown stems. Jesus Christ, I whispered, stepping into what had been $3,000 worth of rare varietals and heritage plants. The whole quarter-acre plot looked like a war zone. My hands shook as I knelt beside the herb spiral I'd built stone by stone, watching my fingers come away sticky with whatever chemical cocktail had done this. I knew exactly who was responsible. Marcus Brennan, my next-door neighbor and the biggest piece of shit in a 3-mile radius. This had his fingerprints all over it, revenge for last Tuesday's property dispute, which was really just me politely asking him to trim the branches hanging 15 feet over my fence line. The bastard had smiled when he'd said no. That same shit-eating grin I was sure he was wearing right now, probably watching from his kitchen window as I surveyed the devastation. My phone buzzed. A text from my client Sarah Martinez. Can't wait to see the garden photos for my consultation today. Your Instagram posts make me so jealous of your setup. I almost laughed. What setup? The raised beds I'd custom-built from reclaimed cedar were now graveyards. The drip irrigation system I'd spent 6 weekends perfecting was watering dead earth. The living privacy wall of jasmine and honeysuckle that had taken 18 months to establish was gone. This garden wasn't just my hobby, it was my portfolio. As a landscape designer, potential clients expected to see what I could do in my own space. Those jealous Instagram posts Sarah mentioned. They'd brought me $40,000 in new business this year alone. Clients would drive 20 minutes out of their way just to see my backyard before signing contracts. Now what did I have to show them? I pulled out my phone and started documenting everything. Photo after photo of destruction, making sure to capture the property line where the damage stopped abruptly, right at Marcus's fence. The herbicide hadn't drifted, this was surgical. Deliberate. My hands were steadier now. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by something colder and more focused. Marcus thought he could destroy 2 years of my life over some tree branches. He thought he could cost me thousands of dollars and God knows how many future clients because his precious view was blocked by a few leaves. The man clearly didn't understand who he was dealing with. I'd spent the last 8 years crawling through building codes and permit processes for my landscape projects. I knew every city inspector by name, understood exactly which violations got fast-tracked for enforcement, and had developed a keen eye for spotting problems that homeowners preferred to ignore. As I stood in my poisoned garden, breathing in the chemical stench of Marcus's handiwork, I found myself really looking at his property for the first time. The sagging roofline. The jury-rigged electrical meter. The addition that definitely hadn't been there in the county assessor photos from 2015. Marcus wanted to play games. Fine. Game on. The insurance adjuster showed up 3 hours after I called, a tired-looking woman named Patricia Chen who'd probably seen every kind of property damage imaginable. What she hadn't seen, apparently, was anything quite this deliberate. In 22 years, I've never documented herbicide damage this extensive on a residential claim, she said, kneeling beside my dead tomato plants with a soil testing kit. The application pattern suggests multiple concentrated doses over several days. This wasn't accidental overspray. I watched her work, photographing everything with the same methodical precision I'd used earlier. Each dead plant got cataloged, GPS tagged, and assigned a replacement value that made my stomach clench. The Cherokee purple tomatoes alone were worth $400. Those seeds had come from a heritage farm in Tennessee that only sold 50 packets per year. What's your coverage limit for landscaping? Patricia asked, not looking up from her tablet. 5,000. The number felt pathetic now. I never thought. I mean, who poisoned someone's entire garden? She glanced toward Marcus's house, where his truck had been conspicuously absent all morning. Someone who doesn't understand that malicious property damage can trigger criminal charges. Have you filed a police report? I hadn't. Honestly, the thought of explaining this whole mess to some bored cop who'd probably tell me it was a civil matter made me want to scream. But Patricia was right, this wasn't just neighbor drama anymore. This was destruction of property worth more than most people's cars. I'll call them after you finish here, I said. By 2 p.m., I had a case number, photos uploaded to 3 different cloud storage accounts, and soil samples sealed in evidence bags. I also had something else, time to kill while waiting for the lab results, and a perfect view of Marcus's property from my destroyed garden. The man was practically broadcasting his code violations like a how-to manual for getting your house condemned. I started with the obvious stuff. The addition jutting out from his east wall was clearly newer construction. I could tell from the different siding material and the way it didn't quite line up with the existing roofline. But there were no permit records for it in the city database. I checked. Then there was the electrical situation. His meter box was a rusted disaster held together with electrical tape, with at least 6 cables running into it that definitely hadn't been installed by a licensed electrician. One of them was an extension cord. An actual orange Home Depot extension cord, weatherproofed with a plastic bag and duct tape. But the real prize was his driveway. Marcus had been parking his landscaping trailer there for 3 years, and the thing leaked oil like a sieve. The staining was visible from space, probably, but more importantly, it was visible from the street. Soil contamination from commercial vehicles parked on residential property was exactly the kind of environmental violation that got the city's attention fast. I pulled up the municipal code on my laptop, cross-referencing section numbers with my growing list of observations. Unpermitted construction, $500 to $2,000 fine, potential stop work order. Electrical code violations, $300 to $1,500 fine, plus mandatory inspection and remediation. Environmental contamination, $1,000 to $5,000 fine, possible EPA involvement. My phone rang, Sarah Martinez, my 3 p.m. consultation. Hey, I'm running about 10 minutes early, she said. Is it okay if I swing by now? I'm so excited to see your setup before we talk about my project. My setup. Right. Actually, Sarah, something's come up. Could we reschedule? Maybe meet at your place instead. Oh. The disappointment in her voice was obvious. Is everything okay? I looked out at my poisoned wasteland, then back at Marcus's code violation wonderland. Everything's fine, I lied. Just dealing with some landscaping issues. Rain check. After I hung up, I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing. Formal complaint, unpermitted construction, 1247, Oakwood Drive. Time to get to work. The city building department opened at 8 a.m. sharp, and I was waiting in the parking lot at 7:45 with a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. I'd spent the entire night documenting every violation I could spot on Marcus's property, complete with photographs, municipal code references, and a timeline that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. My first stop was Rita Valdez, the senior building inspector who'd approved my pergola permit last spring. She remembered me. Apparently, I was one of the few contractors who actually read the code requirements before submitting applications. What can I do for you, Danny? She asked, gesturing to the folder in my hands. Please tell me you're not here about another setback variance. Actually, I'm here to report some violations in my neighborhood. I slid 3 photographs across her desk. 1247, Oakwood Drive. Unpermitted addition, electrical hazards, possible environmental contamination. Rita's expression shifted as she examined the photos. The first showed Marcus's addition from 3 different angles, highlighting how the roofline didn't match and the foundation work looked like a weekend DIY project. The second was a close-up of his electrical meter, where 6 different cables snaked into the box like metallic spaghetti. The third showed the oil stains on his driveway, dark patches that had clearly been accumulating for years. Jesus, she muttered, reaching for her reading glasses. How long has this been like this? The addition's been there at least 3 years, based on Google Earth images. I can't find any permits on file. I pulled out my laptop and showed her the city database. See. Last permit for that address was a water heater replacement in 2019. Rita was already reaching for her phone. I'm calling Rodriguez in electrical. If this is as bad as it looks, we might need to red tag the whole property pending a full inspection. Red tag. The word sent a surge of satisfaction through my chest. A red tag meant the house was uninhabitable until all violations were corrected. It meant Marcus would be scrambling to find temporary housing while dealing with thousands of dollars in mandatory repairs. But then Rita paused, her finger hovering over the keypad. Danny, I have to ask, what's your interest in this property? Are you filing a complaint as a concerned neighbor, or is there something else going on here? Shit. I should have seen this coming. City employees weren't stupid. They knew that most violation reports came from neighbor disputes, and they had protocols for handling potential harassment complaints. My neighbor and I had a disagreement about some overhanging branches last week, I said carefully. Yesterday morning I discovered that someone had poisoned my entire garden with herbicide. I have a police report and an insurance claim open. Rita's eyebrows shot up. Someone poisoned your garden. 2 years worth of heirloom plants. About $5,000 in damage. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos from yesterday morning. I'm not filing this complaint out of spite, Rita. I'm filing it because I finally took a close look at his property and realized it's a safety hazard. She studied the photos of my destroyed garden, her expression darkening. Wow. That's really deliberate, isn't it? The herbicide stopped exactly at the property line. Surgical precision. Rita set down my phone and picked up Marcus's violation photos again, but now her focus was sharper. Professional. Okay, here's what's going to happen. I'll schedule a preliminary inspection for this afternoon. We can fast-track it as a safety concern based on these electrical issues. If Rodriguez confirms what I'm seeing here, we'll escalate to a full compliance review. What does that mean, timeline-wise? If the violations are as extensive as they appear, owner gets a notice of violation with 30 days to submit remediation plans and pull proper permits. If the electrical situation is dangerous, we can red tag immediately. She paused. Danny, you understand this could get expensive for your neighbor very quickly, right? I thought about my Cherokee purple tomatoes. About the jasmine wall that had taken 18 months to grow. About Sarah Martinez's disappointed voice when I had to cancel our consultation. Good, I said. Rita nodded slowly. I'll have Rodriguez out there by 2 p.m. We'll need you available in case he has questions about the complaint. I was walking back to my truck when my phone rang. Unknown local number. Danny Morrison. This is Officer Jennifer Walsh with Oakland PD. I'm calling about the property damage report you filed yesterday. I wanted to let you know we've spoken with Mr. Brennan. My heart rate spiked. And he's denying any involvement in the herbicide incident. Says he was out of town from Sunday through Tuesday this week, visiting family in Sacramento. Claims he has receipts. The satisfaction from my meeting with Rita evaporated instantly. That's impossible. The damage happened Monday night or early Tuesday morning. Mr. Brennan provided documentation of his whereabouts. Hotel receipts, gas station purchases. We'll need to verify everything, but his alibi looks solid at first glance. I stood there in the city parking lot, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I was hearing. If Marcus hadn't poisoned my garden, then who the hell had? And what exactly was I about to do to an innocent man? The doubt hit me like a physical blow, standing there in the city parking lot with Officer Walsh's words echoing in my head. Marcus had an alibi. Hotel receipts. Gas station purchases. Documentation that could prove he wasn't even in town when my garden was destroyed. Officer Walsh, I said, gripping the phone tighter, can you tell me what hotels? What dates exactly? I can't share specific details of an ongoing investigation, Mr. Morrison. But I will say his documentation covers Sunday through Tuesday morning. Check-in at a Sacramento Holiday Inn on Sunday at 3:47 p.m., multiple purchases at local establishments through Tuesday. Tuesday morning. The herbicide damage had happened sometime Monday night. I'd found it Tuesday at 7 a.m., and the chemical stench was still fresh. If Marcus checked out Tuesday morning and drove back from Sacramento, he could have made it home by afternoon, but the timeline didn't work for the actual poisoning. We'll continue investigating, Walsh continued. Is it possible someone else might have had access to your property? Any other neighbor disputes? Service workers who might have felt wronged? I ran through the possibilities as she spoke. The Hendersons on the other side were snowbirds, gone to Arizona since October. Mrs. Chin across the street had actually complimented my tomatoes last month. The new couple at the end of the block barely knew I existed. No, I said finally. No one else has had any issues with my garden. Well, keep documenting everything. If we find evidence pointing to a different suspect, we'll follow up. In the meantime, your insurance claim should proceed normally. After she hung up, I sat in my truck for 10 minutes, staring at the folder full of Marcus's code violations on my passenger seat. If he hadn't poisoned my garden, then I was about to destroy an innocent man's life out of pure spite. The building inspection was happening in 3 hours. Rita was calling Rodriguez in electrical. The wheels were already in motion. But something didn't add up. The herbicide damage was too precise, too targeted. Someone had spent significant time mapping out exactly where my property ended and Marcus's began. They'd known which plants were most valuable, hitting the heritage tomatoes and heirloom roses while leaving the common marigolds along the back fence mostly untouched. This wasn't random vandalism. This was personal. I drove home and walked straight to the property line, examining the damage pattern again with fresh eyes. The herbicide application followed my fence perfectly, not a single dead plant on Marcus's side, not even overspray on the grass. Whoever did this knew my garden layout intimately. That's when I noticed the footprints. Pressed into the soft soil around my herb spiral were boot prints, size 11 or 12, with a distinctive tread pattern. Work boots, not sneakers. The prints circled the entire garden bed, following the same methodical pattern as the herbicide damage. I grabbed my phone and photographed everything, zooming in on the clearest impressions. Then I walked over to Marcus's side of the fence and peered through the gaps in the boards. His work boots were sitting on his back porch, covered in dried mud. Same size. Same tread pattern. My heart started pounding as I compared the photos. The boot prints in my soil were identical to the treads on Marcus's work boots. But if he was in Sacramento Sunday through Tuesday, how were his boots walking through my garden Monday night? Unless he wasn't actually in Sacramento. Unless someone else had been using his credit card and checking into hotels under his name. Or unless he'd come home earlier than the receipt suggested and been very careful about creating a false timeline. I was still staring at the boot comparison when my phone rang. Rita Valdez. Danny, Rodriguez is on his way to the inspection now. But I wanted to give you a heads up, your neighbor called the office about an hour ago. Said he heard someone was filing harassment complaints against him and wanted to know if he could submit a countercomplaint. A countercomplaint for what? Malicious reporting. False accusations. He claims you've been taking photos of his property and threatening to make his life hell over a property line dispute. Rita's voice was carefully neutral. Is there any truth to that? I thought about the manila folder full of violation photos, the hours I'd spent cross-referencing municipal codes, the grim satisfaction I'd felt when she mentioned red tagging his house. We had a disagreement about overhanging branches, I said. That's it. Look, Danny, I'm going to proceed with the inspection because these electrical issues are legitimate safety concerns. But if this turns into a neighbor war, the city's going to step back and let you two work it out in civil court. We don't have resources to referee property disputes. After she hung up, I stood in my destroyed garden, looking at the boot prints that perfectly matched Marcus's treads, while knowing he supposedly had an ironclad alibi for the night my plants were poisoned. Either he was innocent and I was about to ruin him out of misplaced rage, or he was guilty and smart enough to fabricate an elaborate alibi while still being careless enough to leave his own boot prints at the crime scene. At 2:15 p.m., I watched Rodriguez pull up to Marcus's house in a city inspection van, clipboard in hand and camera around his neck. Time to find out which version of the truth was going to win. Rodriguez spent 45 minutes inside Marcus's house, and I could hear him moving around through the thin walls, footsteps in the basement, the creak of floorboards upstairs, the occasional muttered, "Jesus Christ," that carried through the open windows. I positioned myself at my kitchen sink, washing the same plate 3 times while watching the inspection unfold. When Marcus's truck pulled into his driveway at 3:20 p.m., Rodriguez was photographing the electrical meter with the kind of methodical precision that meant bad news. I watched Marcus climb out of his cab, still wearing the same Sacramento Kings t-shirt from his supposed alibi trip, and approach the inspector with what looked like forced confidence. Their conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes. I couldn't hear the words, but Marcus's body language told the whole story, shoulders sagging, hands gesturing helplessly at his house, the universal posture of a man watching his world collapse in real time. Rodriguez handed him a red notice, shook his head at something Marcus said, then packed up his equipment and left. The paper stayed clutched in Marcus's fist as he stood in his driveway, staring at his condemned house like he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Rita Valdez, and she sounded grim. Danny, I need you to sit down for this. Rodriguez found some things at 1247 Oakwood that go way beyond simple code violations. How bad are we talking? The electrical system is a fire hazard. Whoever wired that addition used aluminum wire spliced directly into copper mains with wire nuts and electrical tape. The whole thing should have burned down years ago. She paused. But that's not the worst part. When Rodriguez went into the basement to trace the electrical, he found structural damage that looks like active foundation settling. Major cracks in the support beams, improvised jack posts holding up sagging floor joists. The house isn't just non-compliant, Danny. It's genuinely unsafe. I sank onto my couch, suddenly feeling sick. What does that mean for Marcus? Red tag, effective immediately. The house is uninhabitable until everything's brought up to code. We're talking complete electrical rewiring, foundation repairs, permits and inspections for the addition. Easily $60,000 to $80,000 in work. $80,000. The number hit me like a slap. Even if Marcus was guilty of poisoning my garden, did anyone deserve to lose their home over some dead plants? Rita, There's more. Rodriguez also found evidence of a possible illegal rental situation. The addition has a separate entrance, its own kitchenette, and a mailbox addressed to someone named David Chin. If Marcus has been running an unpermitted rental unit, that's additional fines plus potential housing authority involvement. David Chin. Mrs. Chin across the street had mentioned her nephew staying somewhere in the neighborhood while he looked for his own place. I'd assumed he was crashing on her couch, not renting Marcus's illegal basement apartment. Danny, are you there? Yeah, sorry. Just processing all this. Look, I want you to know that everything Rodriguez found today was a legitimate safety concern. This wasn't harassment or overreach. That house needed to be red tagged regardless of who filed the complaint. But your neighbor is going to be displaced, probably for months, while dealing with repairs that might cost more than the house is worth. After Rita hung up, I walked to my front window and looked across at Marcus's place. He was sitting on his front steps now, still holding the red notice, staring at nothing. His truck was loaded with landscaping equipment, mowers, trimmers, bags of mulch. Tools of a trade that required having a place to store everything, a base of operations for his small business. I thought about the boot prints in my garden, identical to the treads on his work boots. About the precise herbicide application that had surgically destroyed 2 years of my work. About Officer Walsh's phone call and the Sacramento hotel receipts that gave him an alibi I couldn't quite believe. Then I thought about Rodriguez finding structural damage that could kill someone, electrical work that could start a fire, foundation problems that had been ignored for God knows how long. Maybe Marcus had poisoned my garden. Maybe he hadn't. But either way, his house had been a disaster waiting to happen, and now someone, me, had finally forced the city to notice. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hope you're happy. Lost everything because of your petty bullshit. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Outside, Marcus was loading his truck with what looked like the contents of his entire bedroom. The game wasn't over yet. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of a moving truck backing into Marcus's driveway. Through my bedroom window, I watched him directing 2 guys in coveralls as they loaded his furniture piece by piece. The red condemnation notice was still taped to his front door, fluttering in the breeze like a scarlet letter. I was making coffee when my doorbell rang. Marcus stood on my porch, looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. His Sacramento Kings shirt was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was holding a manila envelope that looked suspiciously similar to the one I'd taken to Rita Valdez yesterday. We need to talk, he said. Every instinct told me to slam the door in his face, but something about his expression, defeated but not angry, made me pause. About what? About who really poisoned your garden. He held up the envelope. And about why you're so convinced it was me when I can prove I wasn't even in town. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He sat at my kitchen table and spread out the contents of the envelope, hotel receipts, gas station purchases, restaurant bills, even a photo of him with an elderly woman at what looked like a 75th birthday party. Sunday afternoon through Tuesday morning, he said, pointing to timestamps on the receipts. My aunt's birthday party in Sacramento. 43 family members can vouch for me, including my ex-wife who hates my guts but took this picture. He slid the photo across the table. Check the metadata if you want. Sunday at 6:22 p.m. I studied the receipts, looking for gaps or inconsistencies. The timeline was ironclad. Holiday and check-in Sunday at 3:47 p.m. Dinner at Applebee's Sunday at 7:15 p.m. Gas station purchase Monday morning at 8:33 a.m. Another restaurant charge Monday at 1:45 p.m. Hotel checkout Tuesday at 10:15 a.m., followed by gas purchases tracking his drive home. If you weren't here Monday night, then explain the boot prints in my garden, I said, pulling out my phone to show him the photos. Size 11 work boots, same tread pattern as the ones on your porch. Marcus looked at the images, then laughed, not with humor, but with the bitter sound of someone who just figured out how thoroughly they'd been screwed. Those aren't my boots, he said. I mean, they're the same brand and size, but those aren't mine. Mine were in Sacramento with me because I wore them to the party. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos. Here. Sunday morning, getting dressed for the drive. Same boots, on my feet. The photo showed Marcus in his bedroom mirror, wearing the work boots I'd seen on his porch. But if he'd worn them to Sacramento, then whose boots are those outside? David's, Marcus said quietly. David Chen. The kid who's been renting my addition for 6 months. He wears the same size, bought the same brand after his got stolen from a job site. Marcus ran his hands through his hair. I gave him a key to the main house so he could use the laundry room. He's been wearing my spare pair of boots when his are muddy. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. David Chen, Mrs. Chen's nephew, had been living in Marcus's illegal addition. He had access to Marcus's property, Marcus's boots, and a perfect view of my garden from his basement windows. More importantly, he'd known that Marcus would be out of town, the perfect opportunity to settle some unknown grievance while ensuring his landlord took the blame. Why would David poison my garden? I asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. 3 weeks ago, you called the city about a noise complaint. Late night music coming from my property. Remember? I did remember. Someone had been playing loud music until 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I'd filed a complaint online rather than confronting anyone directly. That was David. That was David having friends over. The city sent me a warning notice, and I had to tell him no more parties or I'd evict him. Kid was pissed, said the complaint was bullshit harassment from some asshole neighbor who couldn't mind his own business. Marcus met my eyes. He asked which neighbor. I pointed to your house. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. David Chen had destroyed my garden because of a noise complaint. Marcus was losing his house because I'd assumed the worst and gone nuclear with building code violations. And somewhere in the middle of this clusterfuck, an innocent man's life was being ruined while the actual culprit was probably halfway to a new apartment. Where's David now? I asked. Gone. Moved out yesterday morning, right after the inspection. Said he didn't want to deal with the drama. Marcus stood up, collecting his receipts. Funny thing is, your complaint probably did me a favor in the long run. Rodriguez found problems that could have killed someone. The electrical work, the foundation settling, I had no idea it was that bad. He headed toward my front door, then turned back. I'm not going to sue you, Danny. The house was a disaster, and maybe I needed someone to force me to see it. But that kid played us both, and now he's walking away clean while we're dealing with the fallout. After Marcus left, I sat at my kitchen table staring at his evidence, feeling like the world's biggest fool. Outside, the moving truck was pulling away, leaving behind an empty house with a red condemnation notice and a mystery I should have solved 3 days ago. David Chen was gone, but he'd left one hell of a mess in his wake. I spent the rest of the morning tracking down David Chen, and what I found made my blood boil. Mrs. Chen across the street confirmed that her nephew had moved out, suddenly, on Tuesday morning, claiming his rental situation had become complicated. When I pressed for details, she mentioned that David had been complaining for weeks about the asshole neighbor who kept calling the city about everything. He said someone was trying to get him evicted over loud music, Mrs. Chen explained, wringing her hands nervously. David can be dramatic. But he's family, so I didn't ask too many questions. Dramatic. That was one way to put it. The kid had committed what amounted to agricultural terrorism because I'd filed a noise complaint. I called Officer Walsh with the new information, but her response wasn't encouraging. Without physical evidence tying David Chen to the herbicide application, we can't pursue charges. Boot prints aren't enough, he lived on the property, so his presence there isn't unusual. And he's not returning our calls. What about the timing? He disappeared right after Marcus got the red tag. Suspicious, yes. Criminal proof, no. I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison. Unless we find the herbicide containers with his fingerprints or locate witnesses who saw him in your garden, this case is going nowhere. After hanging up, I drove to David's last known workplace, a landscaping company called Verde Solutions about 15 minutes away. The owner, a sun-weathered guy named Rick Castellanos, remembered David clearly. Worked here for 3 months, Rick said, leaning against his truck. Decent enough kid, but he had a temper. Got fired 2 weeks ago for screaming at a client who complained about noise from our equipment. Fired for arguing about noise complaints. Fired for telling Mrs. Patterson on Elm Street that she could shove her noise ordinance up her entitled ass when she asked us to keep it down during her baby's nap time. Rick shook his head. Kid had serious issues with authority. Always ranting about neighbors and HOAs and people who call the city over stupid shit. My stomach dropped. Did he have access to herbicides here? Commercial grade stuff, yeah. We keep Roundup and stronger chemicals in the storage shed. But we do inventory every Friday, and nothing's been missing. He paused, thinking. Actually, wait. There was a partial container of Garlon 4 that went missing about 2 weeks ago. Industrial brush killer. Nasty stuff. Garlon 4. I'd looked up herbicide types after finding my destroyed garden, and Garlon 4 was exactly the kind of chemical that could cause the systematic plant death I'd witnessed. It was also restricted use, requiring certification to purchase legally. Did you report the missing chemicals? Honestly? No. It was only about half a gallon, and we figured someone just used it on a job and forgot to log it. Happens sometimes. Rick's expression darkened as he connected the dots. Shit. You think David took it? I thought David had taken it, used it to destroy my garden, then disappeared before anyone could connect him to the crime. But thinking and proving were two different things, and Rick's missing chemical inventory wasn't enough to build a criminal case. When I got home, Marcus's house looked like a ghost town. The moving truck was gone, windows were dark, and the red condemnation notice flapped in the afternoon breeze like a surrender flag. I'd started this war to get justice for my poisoned garden, and instead I destroyed an innocent man's life while the real culprit walked away laughing. But as I stood there staring at the empty house, a new thought occurred to me. David Chen might be gone, but he'd left behind something valuable, a pattern of behavior. The noise complaint incident, the confrontation at Verde Solutions, his rants about neighbors and city officials. Maybe I couldn't prove David had poisoned my garden, but I could damn sure make sure he faced consequences for something. I pulled out my laptop and started searching for David Chen's new address. It was time to return the favor. Finding David Chen's new address took exactly 37 minutes of internet sleuthing. The kid had zero digital privacy awareness. His Instagram was public, showing him at a new apartment complex called Riverside Gardens with geotags still enabled. A quick cross-reference with rental listings pulled up his exact unit, 2847, Riverside Drive, apartment 15B. But I wasn't planning to confront him. I was planning something much more systematic. I spent Wednesday evening parked across from Riverside Gardens, watching David's routine. He left for work at 7:15 a.m. in a beat-up Honda Civic, returned around 6 p.m. with takeout, and had friends over until well past midnight, the same pattern that had started this whole mess. The difference was that Riverside Gardens was a much nicer complex than Marcus's basement edition, with strict lease agreements and management that actually gave a shit about tenant behavior. Thursday morning, I called the property management office. Riverside Property Management, this is Jessica speaking. Hi, I'm calling about a noise disturbance at 2847, Riverside Drive, apartment 15B. Late night parties, music until 2 a.m., multiple nights this week. Oh no, I'm sorry to hear that. Are you a neighbor in the complex? I live across the street. The music is so loud I can hear it through my closed windows. Not technically true yet, but give it time. I wanted to report it before calling the city with a formal noise complaint. Jessica's tone sharpened with professional concern. Absolutely, thank you for reaching out to us first. I'll make a note in the tenant file and have our security do a wellness check tonight. Riverside Gardens has a 3-strike policy for noise violations. Strike 1. Friday afternoon brought a new opportunity when I spotted David loading landscaping equipment into his Honda, hedge trimmers, leaf blowers, bags of fertilizer. He was clearly doing side jobs for cash, which meant he was running a business out of his apartment without declaring it on his lease application. I called Riverside Property Management again, this time as a concerned neighbor who'd noticed commercial vehicles and equipment being stored in the residential parking area. Jessica sounded less friendly this time. Apparently David had already gotten a warning about Thursday night's noise. We'll send someone to inspect the parking situation, she said tersely. Commercial use of residential units is grounds for immediate lease termination. Strike 2. But the real prize came Saturday morning when I noticed something I'd missed before. David's landscaping equipment was professional grade, the kind that required certification to operate legally. A quick check of the state licensing database showed no commercial landscaping license registered to David Chin. He was operating an unlicensed business, which meant tax evasion, insurance fraud, and a dozen other violations I could report. I spent Saturday afternoon building a comprehensive file on David's illegal business operations. Screenshots of his Instagram posts advertising affordable lawn care and garden design services. Photos of him loading commercial equipment. A list of his apparent clients based on social media geotags. Everything a tax investigator or licensing board would need to build a case. By Sunday evening, I had David Chen's life mapped out like a military campaign. 3 different government agencies would be receiving anonymous tips about his activities. Riverside Property Management would be getting detailed documentation of lease violations. His new neighbors would be getting friendly warnings about the problem tenant who just moved in. David thought he could poison my garden and disappear without consequences. He was about to learn that some neighbors fight back with compound interest. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the news about Marcus's house. Karma's a bitch, isn't it? I stared at the message, feeling that familiar cold rage building in my chest. David Chen was taunting me, confident he'd won this game. He had no idea I was just getting started. Monday morning brought my first real victory when Jessica from Riverside Property Management called back. Mr. Morrison. I wanted to follow up on your complaints about apartment 15B. We conducted a lease violation inspection this weekend and found multiple unauthorized items in the unit and parking area. Commercial landscaping equipment, chemical storage, and evidence of business operations from a residential property. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Property managers loved having legitimate reasons to evict problem tenants. What happens next? We've issued a formal lease violation notice with 72 hours to cure. All commercial equipment must be removed, and any business operations must cease immediately. If Mr. Chen doesn't comply, we'll proceed with eviction proceedings. 72 hours. David would have to choose between his illegal side business and his apartment. Either way, his comfortable new life was about to get very uncomfortable. But my real masterstroke came Tuesday afternoon when I received a call from someone I hadn't expected, Rick Castellanos from Verde Solutions. Danny, that missing Garland I mentioned. I did some digging through our security footage after you left. Found something you need to see. 20 minutes later, I was standing in Rick's office watching grainy camera footage from 3 weeks ago. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. on a Friday, well after business hours. A figure in a hooded sweatshirt was moving around the storage shed with a flashlight, clearly trying to avoid detection. Watch this part, Rick said, zooming in as the figure turned toward the camera. The hood fell back for just a moment, revealing David Chen's face in perfect clarity. Kid thought the cameras only covered the front gate. Didn't realize we added perimeter security last year. My heart rate spiked as I watched David emerge from the shed carrying a container of herbicide. This was it, actual proof that he'd stolen the chemicals used to poison my garden. Rick, I need a copy of this footage. And I need you to file a police report for theft of restricted chemicals. Already called it in this morning. Detective Walsh said she'd be here this afternoon to collect the evidence. Rick paused the video on a clear shot of David's face. Kid's looking at felony charges now. Theft of hazardous materials, illegal pesticide application, probably environmental violations too. When I called Officer Walsh an hour later, her tone was completely different from our previous conversations. Mr. Morrison, we now have sufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges against David Chin. The theft is captured clearly on video, and we can tie the stolen chemicals to the damage on your property through soil analysis. We'll be issuing a warrant for his arrest by end of business today. What kind of charges? Theft in the second degree, unlawful application of pesticides, malicious destruction of property. He's looking at potential jail time and significant fines. She paused. There's one complication, though. When we went to serve papers at his apartment this morning, property management informed us he'd been evicted yesterday for lease violations. Current whereabouts unknown. The satisfaction I'd been feeling evaporated instantly. He's gone again. Cleared out Sunday night, apparently. Left behind most of his furniture and equipment rather than face the eviction process. We're checking with known associates and family members, but David Chin seems to have a habit of disappearing when things get complicated. After hanging up, I drove past Riverside Gardens and confirmed what Officer Walsh had told me. David's Honda Civic was nowhere to be seen, and through the apartment windows I could see the empty rooms that had been his home for exactly 9 days. He'd vanished again, staying one step ahead of consequences that were finally catching up to him. But this time was different. This time he was running from felony charges, not just angry neighbors. This time there would be warrants and databases and a paper trail that would follow him wherever he tried to hide. My phone buzzed with another text from his number. Nice try with the property management complaints. But you'll have to do better than that. I smiled as I typed back, check the news tomorrow. Grand theft charges are public record. This time, I was ready for a long game. The warrant for David Chen's arrest made the local news Tuesday evening, just a brief mention on the crime blotter, but enough to send a clear message. I screenshotted the article and sent it to his phone number along with a simple message, this is just the beginning. He didn't respond, but I knew he'd seen it. David was somewhere out there, probably crashing on a friend's couch or hiding out with family, thinking he could wait out the storm. What he didn't realize was that I'd spent the last week building a comprehensive case file that went far beyond just the herbicide theft. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected call from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Agent Patricia Reeves introduced herself with the kind of crisp professionalism that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Mr. Morrison, we received an anonymous tip about unreported income from illegal landscaping operations. The documentation provided was quite thorough, social media evidence, client lists, approximate revenue calculations. We'd like to ask you a few questions. I'd been hoping for a callback from the tax evasion tip, but I hadn't expected the criminal investigation unit to pick it up this quickly. I'm happy to help with whatever information I can provide. The suspect, David Chin, appears to have been operating an unlicensed landscaping business for approximately 8 months, generating an estimated $15,000 to $20,000 in unreported income. Do you have any personal knowledge of these activities? I know he was doing lawn care work on weekends while living in my neighborhood. Cash payments, no receipts, definitely not reporting it as income. I pulled up my documentation file. I have screenshots of his social media posts advertising services, if that would be helpful. Very helpful. We'll need everything you have. Tax evasion combined with the theft charges creates a federal case with significantly enhanced penalties. After emailing Agent Reeves my entire David Chin file, I felt that familiar satisfaction settling in my chest. He wasn't just facing local charges anymore. Federal tax evasion could mean years in prison and financial penalties that would follow him for decades. But the real breakthrough came Thursday afternoon when Mrs. Chin called me directly. Mr. Morrison, I understand there's been some trouble involving my nephew David. The police came by asking questions, and I think I may have made a mistake. What kind of mistake, Mrs. Chin? When David moved out of Marcus's place, he asked if he could store some equipment in my garage temporarily. I said yes because he's family. Her voice was shaky, nervous. But after the police visit, I looked at what he'd left behind. There are chemicals, Mr. Morrison. Bottles with warning labels and hazard symbols. I think some of them might be what they're looking for. My heart started pounding. If David had stashed the remaining stolen herbicides at his aunt's house, that was physical evidence linking him directly to the theft. Mrs. Chen, you need to call Detective Walsh immediately. Don't touch anything, don't move anything. Just call the police. I'm scared, Mr. Morrison. David is family, but what he did to your garden, that was wrong. And now there are dangerous chemicals stored 20 feet from where my grandchildren play. Within 2 hours, I watched from my front window as a police crime scene unit processed Mrs. Chen's garage. They emerged carrying evidence bags containing multiple herbicide containers, including what looked like the missing Garlon 4 from Verde Solutions. Detective Walsh knocked on my door at 6:30 p.m. with an update that made my entire week. We found everything, Mr. Morrison. The stolen chemicals, mixing equipment, even David's notebook with detailed plans of your garden layout and application schedules. He'd been planning this for over 2 weeks, mapping out which plants to target for maximum damage. A notebook, complete with sketches of your property, plant identification, even calculations for herbicide concentrations. This wasn't a spontaneous act of vandalism, it was premeditated destruction designed to cause the maximum psychological and financial impact. The premeditation angle elevated the charges significantly. David wasn't just looking at theft and property damage anymore, this was conspiracy, stalking, and criminal mischief with deliberate economic harm. There's one more thing, Walsh continued. David's been in contact with his aunt, trying to convince her not to cooperate with the investigation. We recorded the conversation, witness intimidation, obstruction of justice. The kid just can't stop digging himself deeper. As I watched the crime scene unit finish processing Mrs. Chen's garage, my phone buzzed one final time with a message from David's number. You win this round, but I know where you live. I forwarded the threatening text directly to Detective Walsh and smiled. David Chen was about to learn that some games end with handcuffs. Friday morning brought the kind of phone call that makes your blood run cold. Detective Walsh's voice was tight with frustration when she delivered the news I'd been dreading. Mr. Morrison, we have a problem. David Chen's aunt is recanting her statement. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. What do you mean recanting? Mrs. Chen called this morning claiming she misunderstood what the chemicals in her garage were. Says her nephew told her they were regular fertilizers for her garden, and she panicked when she saw police interest. Now she's refusing to testify that David stored evidence at her house. The satisfaction I'd felt watching the crime scene unit bag evidence from her garage evaporated instantly. But you have the chemicals. You have his notebook with my garden mapped out. We have chemicals found on her property with her permission, but without her testimony establishing chain of custody, that David specifically asked her to store them, the defense can argue we have no proof he put them there. Walsh's frustration was palpable. And the notebook was in a bag mixed with her gardening supplies. David's lawyer will claim it belonged to Mrs. Chen, that she was the one sketching neighborhood properties. I stared out my kitchen window at Mrs. Chen's house, where she was conspicuously avoiding eye contact while watering her front flower beds. He got to her. David threatened his own aunt into changing her story. Probably. But we can't prove that either. The witness intimidation charge was based on phone recordings we made with her consent, but if she's no longer cooperating. Walsh trailed off, and I could hear her flipping through paperwork. We still have the theft charges from Verde Solutions. Rick's security footage is solid, and the stolen chemicals match what we found. But the connection to your garden damage just got a lot harder to prove. After Walsh hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. David had played his family card perfectly. Mrs. Chen was more afraid of destroying her relationship with her nephew than she was of obstructing justice. The kid was guilty as hell, but he might walk away from the serious charges because his aunt valued family loyalty over truth. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, heard about the evidence problems. Sorry, man. For what it's worth, contractor says my foundation repairs will run $45,000. House might actually be worth fixing. $45,000. Marcus was looking at financial ruin because of my overzealous building code complaints, while David Chen was potentially going to escape serious consequences because his aunt got cold feet. The injustice of it made my hands shake with rage. But then I remembered something Detective Walsh had mentioned in passing, David's threatening text about knowing where I lived. That message was still on my phone, timestamped after he'd already fled town. If David was making threats while actively avoiding arrest, he was demonstrating exactly the kind of escalating behavior that judges took seriously in bail hearings. I pulled up David's Instagram account and started scrolling through his recent activity. He'd been posting stories from various locations around the city, a coffee shop downtown, a park in the suburbs, a friend's apartment complex. The timestamp showed he was still in the area, probably moving between safe houses while waiting for the legal pressure to die down. More importantly, his posts showed him with landscaping equipment again. Either he'd managed to retrieve some gear before fleeing, or he'd already bought replacements and was back to operating his illegal business. David Chen couldn't help himself. Even while dodging felony charges, he was creating new evidence of tax evasion and unlicensed commercial activity. I screenshot everything and started building a new file. If Mrs. Chen wouldn't cooperate and the garden evidence was compromised, I just have to make sure David buried himself with ongoing criminal behavior. The kid wanted to play a long game. Fine. I had patience, resources, and a growing network of law enforcement contacts who were just as frustrated as I was. David Chen was about to discover that running from consequences only worked if you could actually stop committing crimes. Saturday morning, I was cataloging David's latest Instagram posts when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, mid-40s, professional attire, carrying a leather briefcase that screamed, "Lawyer." "Mr. Morrison. I'm Catherine Webb, attorney for David Chen. I'd like to discuss a resolution to this situation." Every instinct told me to slam the door, but curiosity won. I let her into my living room, where she sat primly on my couch and opened her briefcase with practiced efficiency. "My client is prepared to make full restitution for the damage to your garden," she began, sliding a cashier's check across my coffee table. $15,000, which I believe exceeds your insurance claim and documented losses." I stared at the check without touching it. "Your client poisoned 2 years of work and destroyed irreplaceable heritage plants. He thinks money fixes that. Mr. Morrison, let's be practical. David made a mistake, a serious one, but continuing this vendetta serves no one. He's a 23-year-old kid whose life is being destroyed over a property dispute that got out of hand." "A property dispute?" My voice rose. "He committed premeditated vandalism with stolen industrial chemicals. He threatened me via text message. He intimidated his own aunt into changing her testimony." Webb's expression didn't change. "Alleged intimidation. Mrs. Chen has clarified that she was confused about the items in her garage and spoke to police without fully understanding the situation. As for the text messages, David maintains his phone was stolen and he's not responsible for communications sent from that number." Stolen phone. Of course. David had probably ditched his cell the moment he realized the threatening texts could be used as evidence. This lawyer had coached him well. "The offer stands for 24 hours, Webb continued, closing her briefcase. "After that, David will be pursuing a harassment claim against you for filing false reports with multiple government agencies. The building department complaints against Mr. Brennan, the tax evasion reports, the property management complaints. We have documentation showing a clear pattern of retaliatory behavior." My blood ran cold. Those weren't false reports. Everything I documented was legitimate. Perhaps. But when a prosecutor sees someone filing complaints with the IRS, building department, property management, and police within the same 2-week period, it raises questions about motivation. Especially when the complainant has a documented grudge against the target. She stood to leave, then turned back with what might have been genuine sympathy. "Take the money, Mr. Morrison. Plant a new garden. Move on with your life. Because if this goes to trial, David's defense will be that you're an obsessed neighbor who destroyed an innocent man's housing situation over a noise complaint, then transferred that same vindictive energy to his client when you realized your mistake." After she left, I sat staring at the cashier's check for $15,000. It was more money than my garden had cost, enough to replant everything and have cash left over. David was offering me a clean victory, financial compensation and the satisfaction of knowing he'd been forced to pay for what he'd done. But taking the money felt like admitting that what I'd done to Marcus was wrong. That my systematic destruction of David's life was harassment rather than justice. That maybe I'd become the villain in this story without realizing it. My phone rang. "Detective Walsh. Morrison, we just got David Chen's phone records from the carrier. That threatening text you received. Sent from a cell tower 3 blocks from your house at 11:47 p.m. on Thursday. Either his phone wasn't stolen, or whoever stole it decided to drive to your neighborhood to send threats." I looked down at the cashier's check, then at Catherine Webb's business card. "Walsh, how fast can you pick him up?" The arrest happened Tuesday morning at 6:47 a.m., and I watched it unfold from my kitchen window like the world's most satisfying reality show. David Chen had been staying at his friend's apartment on Maple Street, exactly 3 blocks from my house, just like the cell tower data had indicated. When Detective Walsh and 2 uniformed officers knocked on the door, David tried to run out the back. He made it exactly 15 feet before faceplanting into a chain-link fence. "Mr. Morrison." Walsh called me an hour later, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "We got him. Found your stolen herbicides in his friend's garage, along with detailed maps of your property and a burner phone containing drafted but unsent messages to your number." Kid was planning something. My stomach dropped. Planning what? Hard to say. The drafted texts were escalating, started with more threats about making you pay and evolved into detailed descriptions of what he wanted to do to your house. We also found receipts for road flares and gasoline purchased Sunday night. Road flares and gasoline. David hadn't just been running from consequences, he'd been planning to burn down my house. The $15,000 settlement offer from his lawyer suddenly made perfect sense. Catherine Webb had been trying to buy David's freedom before police discovered his arson supplies. Where does this leave the case? Solid. We have him on the original theft charges, plus attempted witness intimidation, criminal threats, and now conspiracy to commit arson. The physical evidence from his friend's place ties everything together: stolen chemicals, planning materials, receipts for accelerants. Walsh paused. This kid really couldn't help himself, could he? After hanging up, I found Catherine Webb's business card and called her office. Her secretary put me through immediately. "Mr. Morrison, I assume you're calling about the settlement offer. Have you had time to consider?" "Your client was planning to burn down my house," I interrupted. "Police found road flares and gasoline along with detailed plans for targeting my property. How exactly does that factor into your 24-hour deadline?" The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. Finally, I was not aware of any additional evidence being discovered. David's looking at arson charges now. Conspiracy, criminal threats, the whole package. Your settlement offer was contingent on him being a 23-year-old kid who made a mistake, but this goes way beyond garden vandalism. Mr. Morrison, I'll need to consult with my client about these new developments. The settlement offer is obviously withdrawn pending further legal review. Good, because I wouldn't have taken it anyway. What I didn't tell Catherine Webb was that David's escalation had solved my biggest ethical problem. For weeks, I'd been questioning whether my systematic destruction of his life was justified revenge or obsessive harassment. The threatening texts had crossed a line, but road flares and gasoline. That was attempted arson against an occupied dwelling. David Chen wasn't just the vindictive neighbor who'd poisoned my garden anymore. He was a genuine threat who'd escalated from property damage to planning violent crimes. Every building code complaint I'd filed, every tax evasion report, every systematic effort to make his life miserable, all of it was now retroactively justified as necessary pressure that had forced a dangerous criminal into making mistakes. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, saw the news about David's arrest. Arson charges. Jesus, Danny. Good thing you didn't let this slide. I looked out at my still barren garden, then at the cashier's check Webb had left behind. $15,000 to replant everything and pretend none of this had happened. Instead, I tore up the check and started planning my testimony for David Chen's trial. Some victories were worth more than money. The trial was set for October 15th, and I spent the intervening weeks watching David Chen's legal situation deteriorate like a controlled demolition. His bail was set at $75,000, too high for his family to cover, so he sat in county lockup while his charges multiplied. First came the federal tax evasion indictment. Agent Patricia Reeves had built an airtight case showing $23,000 in unreported income over 8 months, supported by David's own social media posts advertising his illegal landscaping services. The IRS didn't mess around with deliberate tax fraud, especially when combined with other felonies. Then the environmental violations landed. The EPA got involved after discovering David had dumped excess herbicide concentrate in a storm drain behind his friend's apartment. Illegal disposal of restricted pesticides carried fines up to $50,000 per violation, plus potential criminal penalties that could add years to his sentence. But the real nightmare for David came from an unexpected source, his former clients. Detective Walsh called me Thursday afternoon with news I hadn't seen coming. Morrison, you're going to love this. Remember those client lists you compiled from David's social media? 3 of them have filed police reports. For what? Theft, property damage, and fraud. Turns out our boy David was quite the entrepreneur. The Henderson family hired him to install a sprinkler system in April. He took their $800 deposit and disappeared. Mrs. Rodriguez paid him $600 for landscape design work that he never completed. And the Patel family claims he damaged their prize-winning rose bushes while trimming hedges, then refused to pay for replacements. I pulled up my David Chin investigation file, cross-referencing the names with his Instagram posts. Sure enough, all 3 families appeared in his social media advertising, posed with landscaping projects that apparently went very wrong. How much money are we talking about? Total. Around $3,200 in client fraud, plus another $1,800 in property damage claims. The DA is adding theft by deception and contractor fraud to his indictment. Kid's looking at 15 separate charges now. 15 charges. David's attempt to run a cash-only landscaping business had been a criminal enterprise from day one: unlicensed work, tax evasion, client fraud, and theft. My building code complaints and tax reports had accidentally uncovered a pattern of behavior that went far beyond poisoning my garden. That afternoon, I drove past the construction site that used to be Marcus's house. He decided to tear down the condemned structure rather than pay for foundation repairs, and a new modular home was being installed on the cleared lot. Marcus waved from the construction trailer that served as his temporary office, gesturing for me to come over. Danny, good timing. I wanted to show you something. He handed me a blueprint for the new house, 2,400 square feet, modern design, properly permitted and inspected. Insurance covered the demolition and most of the rebuild costs once the adjuster confirmed the structural problems predated my ownership. That's incredible, Marcus. You came out ahead. Way ahead. The old house was worth maybe $180,000 on a good day. This new place appraises at $340,000. He rolled up the blueprint, grinning. Your building code complaint saved me from a death trap and accidentally made me rich. Beers on me for the next decade. As I drove home, I reflected on the strange mathematics of justice. David Chen was facing potential decades in prison and hundreds of thousands in fines for what started as garden vandalism. Marcus had lost his condemned house but gained a modern home worth twice as much. My destroyed garden had led to exposing a criminal enterprise that had victimized families throughout the city. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Webb, client pleading guilty to all charges. Sentencing hearing November 8th. Will you be attending? I stared at the message, then typed back, wouldn't miss it. David Chen's war against neighbors and authority figures was finally over. And he'd lost spectacularly. The sentencing hearing on November 8th was everything I'd hoped for and more. I sat in the gallery watching David Chen shuffle to the defendant's table in his orange jumpsuit, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the 3 weeks since his guilty plea. His aunt Mrs. Chen was crying quietly in the front row, but she was the only family member who'd bothered to show up. Judge Patricia Hendricks reviewed the charges with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen it all: 15 counts including theft, tax evasion, environmental violations, conspiracy to commit arson, and malicious destruction of property. The prosecution had recommended 8 years in federal prison plus $127,000 in restitution and fines. Mr. Chen, Judge Hendricks said, adjusting her reading glasses, in 32 years on the bench, I've rarely seen such an escalating pattern of criminal behavior stemming from what should have been a minor neighbor dispute. You destroyed Mr. Morrison's garden because he filed a noise complaint. When that didn't satisfy your desire for revenge, you planned to burn down his house. Where exactly did you think this was going to end? David mumbled something inaudible. His lawyer Catherine Webb whispered urgently in his ear, and he finally spoke up, I'm sorry, Your Honor. I made bad choices. Bad choices? Judge Hendricks leaned forward. Mr. Chen, you stole industrial chemicals, committed premeditated vandalism, evaded taxes, defrauded multiple clients, and stockpiled materials to commit arson. This wasn't poor judgment, this was a sustained criminal enterprise targeting anyone who dared to inconvenience you. The judge sentenced him to 7 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. The financial penalties were staggering: $89,000 in restitution to victims, $38,000 in EPA fines, plus court costs and legal fees that would follow him for decades. Additionally, Judge Hendricks continued, "You are permanently banned from operating any landscaping or contractor business in this state. Your business license applications will be flagged, and any attempt to work in these fields without proper oversight will result in immediate parole violation." As they led David away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one final time. No more smirking confidence, no threatening glares, just the hollow expression of someone who'd finally realized that actions have consequences. Outside the courthouse, Detective Walsh shook my hand with genuine admiration. "Morrison, I've got to ask, when you started filing those building code complaints, did you have any idea it would lead to this?" I thought about that question as I drove home past Marcus's new house, where he was hosting a housewarming barbecue for the neighbors who'd helped him through the construction process. Mrs. Chen was there too, looking relieved that her nightmare nephew was finally facing justice instead of hiding in her garage. The answer was no. I'd never imagined that my quest for revenge over a poisoned garden would expose a criminal who'd been victimizing people throughout the city. But sometimes the best justice happens accidentally, when someone who thinks they're untouchable finally pushes the wrong person too far. My new garden was thriving. I'd used David's restitution money to install raised beds with better drainage, a state-of-the-art irrigation system, and security cameras that monitored every inch of my property. The Cherokee purple tomatoes were already showing fruit, and my heirloom roses had never looked better. 7 years from now, when David Chen gets released from federal prison, he'll return to a world where his victims have moved on and prospered. Marcus will be living in his beautiful new house. I'll be tending an award-winning garden. And David will be a convicted felon with no landscaping license, no business prospects, and a permanent reminder that some neighbors fight back. My house never did get condemned. His life did.